My name's Matthew Williams, and I'm sort of interested in all things underground, and I've been exploring in the Wiltshire area, looking at underground bunkers, quarries, mines, this sort of stuff. But do this a lot around the UK, and I kind of focused a lot on a place called Corsham, where they've got a lot of underground stuff.
Yeah, well, so I know you've also done on top of the ground too, haven't you? The first time I came across you, Matt, was when you were investigating crop circles too.
That's right. Yes, I've got a background in crop circles. I used to make crop circles, if you can believe that. I started off as a UFO researcher in South Wales after having a sighting myself back in the 90s. And looking into books on the subject, I found out about a place called RAF Rudloe Manor, which was investigating UFOs, and subsequently came down here, spent a lot of time, ended up meeting some of the people who were making crop circles, and ended up taking part in doing some of that myself as well. So, yeah.
I mean, I personally have. I mean, maybe you could say something about your sighting, as this is what the UFO community call these events. Mine was one Halloween, very early in the morning, seeing this craft, it looked like a drone, coming across near Yeovil, in the hills down there, just at our level, actually, just below where I was. I was sort of near the top of a hill, and it was early morning after the night before being Halloween, I suppose. But anyway, this was it had forward swept wings. It was basically looked to me like a military drone, but of course there is this, this whole thing with UFOs. Certainly, it's been shown in the States that it was a deliberate policy to try and confuse the public, to tell everyone, oh look, this is there's aliens, flying saucers out there, but actually there's quite a lot of military technology too, which is obviously they want to keep it quiet. Much of it, in fact, is probably not known at all to the press or public.
Yes, I mean, my first sighting was back in Wales. I had very, sort of basic knowledge of the subject of UFOs because, I mean, I'd read, little books on the subject, so I wasn't heavily involved. But I was driving on the mountain road from my home in the Rhondda Valleys over into the Ogur Valley. And as I came across the top of the mountain, I then had the view onto the next mountain, and sitting on the side of it was this huge triangular shape which was shimmering at its edges, and it was almost like a heat haze rather than fire. And because we're used to seeing forest fires in South Wales, but this wasn't a forest fire, and I was looking at the road and sort of driving until I lost sight of it. And then I thought, oh, what was that? I just want to see that before I drive down into the valley. I'm going to lose sight of it. Reverse the car back up, gone, nothing there. So it couldn't have been a forest fire, So that was my first sighting of things. Since then, I've gone on to see a saucer-shaped object, which I would probably put about a mile wide. That was hovering over the village of Pewsey at night, and it was not illuminated, so I could see the outline of it, and a little red ball of light, which had been we caught being chased by a helicopter earlier on. There was like this little thing dancing through the fields, like zigzagging, and so I went up on a hill to get a better sighting of that ball of light, really, and where it was off. And it went in that direction towards Pewsey, and then it went up into the bottom of this saucer that was there, and then it just went flying up into the sky at just such a phenomenal rate. There's no way that any aircraft could do that. It literally just took off and went up into the base of the cloud, so you couldn't see it. It was just like smacked straight into the bottom of the cloud, disappeared. That was it. So I've seen other things, big balls of light, like a huge light, which definitely wasn't a flare. It was filling up most of our left to right vision in the sky, and it was a huge object that was hovering to the south of our location when we were in and around the crop circle area. So we were that was one sighting. And I've also had balls of light chase me out of a field once when we were trying to make a crop circle, and we thought it was farmers originally because lights came on at 3 quarters of the field. So we all got ready to sort of get out of the field pretty sharpish, and as we were sort of running out of the field, looking back, these lights were moving into the position that we'd just been in, but they weren't like torches where you'd see the torch shining on the crop and somebody running or moving quickly. Their hands would be going up and down. The torch would be moving left and right. There was none of that. It was just solid balls of light, golden in colour, and they were all moving into the position where we were trying to make a crop circle, but because of that incident, we had to leave it. We couldn't do it in that field that night. So
well, yeah, I understand. That's just you don't necessarily want to hang around when that sort of thing's going on. Now, it has to be said, this is a very military area, Matt, isn't it?
Wiltshire has got a lot of military stuff in it because of the Salisbury Plain. That takes up a massive area, and yes, we've got army bases. We've got all sorts of stuff, air bases, Boscombe Down, which is the secret testing facility for the MOD and has been for a very long time. Some people refer to that as like the British equivalent of Area 51. It's kind of where we test our secret stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of it is quite low key. But what I like about you is that there's this potential evidence of alien activity, but you also put out this challenge, didn't you? That anybody that says a crop circle has to be made by aliens, couldn't have been made by humans, I'll make it.
Yeah, we actually did a little sort of offer as a challenge, to kind of say, well, if anyone thinks we can't do this, if you pay for the field, so it's legal, we'll make you what you want. So Colin Andrews, who's a big crop circle researcher, he picked a design that he thought would be hard to do, and we went out to complete darkness, filmed ourselves with infrared cameras so we could prove that it was us that were actually doing it. But we replicated a design which had appeared a few years ago, replicated it perfectly under the hours of darkness, before it got light, so no problem at all.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I've also spoken to photographers who rather liked the amounts of money they were getting from getting their pictures of crop circles on the front page of the Sun.
Oh, well, yes. There's some people make money out of it. I think the only people who never really made any money out of it are the people who make the circles. But yeah.
Well, anyway, look, we're going to talk a bit today about the other stuff, which isn't up in the air. It's not on the crop fields. It's under the ground. So that whole area around Corsham you started talking about there before I diverted you, it's quite a fascinating spot, isn't it? I think it was probably in the 1950s it was first revealed that there was dodgy activity of one sort or another going on there, which was basically the idea that in a nuclear war that the British government needed somewhere to hide.
Yes. Well, I think it was in 1936 they bought the area around Basil Hill Barracks in Corsham. It's West Wells Lane, if anybody wants to look it up. There's a huge facility there now, but it was really fairly low key, quite a small facility, and even though it was called RAF Redlow Manor, the manor was not really used because it was very run down. It wasn't something that was actually much in use, but all around the manor itself they built a number of sort of prefab buildings and put them in place, and this served as the headquarters for the RAF police, the Provost and Security Services. And they had probably an intelligence wing there, something like that, because they were involved in.
This is one of the curious things, Matt. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's a curious thing, isn't it, that we know all about army intelligence. It's got websites and goodness knows what, as well as naval intelligence, the other two services. The RAF, we hear nothing.
Yeah, I think they're actually called air intelligence. So rather than RAF, it's air intelligence. And where they operate out of is a bit of a mystery because, I mean, there was a section in London at a place called the Metropole building, which was an old hotel, which was compulsory purchased, when the war was taking place, and converted into an intelligence centre, and that was there up until I think at least the 80s or 90s. It was still operating as an intelligence headquarters. Now, nobody would know that was there. It was just a building. Nobody really knew what went on inside. We're all familiar with MI5 and MI6, but how many people would know about the Metropole building, for example, And that was a massive place. And they were actually the people there that used to investigate UFOs in a secret capacity, because we've all heard about Nick Pope the famous guy from the MOD who's written books. He's now left the MOD, but he was put forward along with a number of people over the years as the face of speaking to the MOD about UFOs. Now, he denied for many years that there was anybody above him that was dealing with the UFO subject. However, I mean, you would imagine that it would have to be something to do with intelligence, people who are trained to know what things are, to be able to identify and even go into foreign areas to recover objects and bring them back. And that's not to say like alien objects. We're just talking about, anything that the MOD would be interested in, like somebody's missile or somebody's aircraft or tank or whatever, and there would be, obviously people would go out and collect these things, bring them back and investigate them. Well, those are probably the best people to then be looking at, the UFO subject as well, because, if things are being flown over the United Kingdom, sighted on radar, maybe visual sightings, people sending in sighting reports or reporting them to the police, all of this would have to get channeled somewhere to be investigated. And there were two main places that were identified as having dealt with this. Although it took a long time, it wasn't until late in the 90s when it was actually admitted to for the very first time that Corsham was one place that used to do the investigations of UFOs, and also a place that we'd found in documents that were released in the Public Records Office. And I must say, I think released by mistake, because when we found these documents, which referred to these other departments, which were intelligence departments, they removed the document from the Public Records Office, which is actually illegal to do. And we had to, there was a big hoo-ha about it, because we, called foul when this document disappeared. And then nobody could actually prove that these references to departments were in this document, because there was no document to look at, So we asked for this to be raised in the Houses of Parliament, because the MOD weren't giving us any joy. They responded saying they didn't know where the document was. I then used some undercover sleuth type techniques, which involved, let's say, a little bit of in non-regular use of military telephone lines, let's put it like that, and managed to find out where that document was and who it was with. So an MP went into the House of Parliament, said, this document's missing. We'd like it returned. And, they said, well, we still don't know where it is. And he says, well, actually, and it's quite a strong thing, isn't it? You probably know this, being a journalist, when they're not allowed to say that somebody is lying to them in the House of Parliament is considered non-practice. But it was basically intimated that the MOD was lying because they knew exactly where the document was. And then within 2 days, the document was returned. So, yeah, and that proved that Corsham, the Provost and Security Service, and this place in London called the DI-55, Defence Intelligence 55, were investigating UFOs. But in that document as well, it also talked about Air Intelligence 5A and 4B, I think it was. And so, yeah, air intelligence, which you don't hear a lot about, but yes, they do exist.
No, you hear very little. Anyway, I mean, the area we're talking about, if people want to know, is around Box and Corsham, and it's in between Bath and Chippenham on the old A4. So if you're ever coming to the West Country, why not head off away from the M4 and just use the A4, and you can have a little look around this area. Some nice walks to be had around there, and I was walking around the other day. There are several sites. The Corsham one is where there's been a lot of work recently. I say recently, starting about 10 years ago, massive amounts of excavation going on. Important also to say that this is in the area of the Box mines, which were the Bath Stone mines. So there's a massive amount of very strong underground that would resist a nuclear bomb even above it, maybe.
Yes.
Which was used to build Bath and much of the surrounding area. And so that's why the military decided to use it. They've also got the Box Tunnel going between Bath and Chippenham, running underneath, which you can see if you're on the train to Bristol, just as you come into tunnel, there's a railway siding that sort of disappears off to the right-hand side under the ground there. And so there's obviously a lot going on. I think there was factories and stuff building aircraft engines and things like that during World War II. And on the other side of the A4, that's the north side of the A4, on the other side were these two bases, Rudloe Manor you mentioned, which was, I actually went there as a teenager in the Air Training Corps for a camp for a week. I don't remember anything about it. I'm not sure if they hypnotised me. I've no idea. But we were all disappointed as kids because there were no aeroplanes anywhere. There was no runway, nothing. Like, what are we doing here? And also this other site, Copenhagen, which was joint services, which has now apparently disappeared. And it's one of these horrid new housing estates with these kind of Lego houses with no gardens. But anyway, can you just say something about those three sites particularly, Matt, and what you think is, have those two sites been closed? Rudloe Manor now looks like it's nothing to say RAF anything. It just looks like a farm. But the only thing is, we were there on a Sunday. There's a load of these 4x4s going in and out, people driving in and out with these automatic gates. And I think we're supposed to think it's just an ordinary farm of some kind.
Well, yes, there's two sites to Rudloe Manor. Site one, which is where the manor house is, which has its own facility behind it, which cannot be seen very easily from the road at all. But you can walk around the back, the fence line, and see some of the old buildings. It's all disused now, but that's where the investigations were done into the UFOs. That was the Provost of Security Service, which are involved in vetting, so they would be getting people their security clearances. That's all kind of defunct now. Somebody's bought the house recently. There's often a lot of stories about there being underground tunnels underneath there, which is part of a bunker. Now that's not correct at all. People get confused because across the road, which would be slightly to the southwest, is the Rudloe Site 2. Now that has the underground stores area, which was called the CAD, which was Central Ammunitions Depot, and it was one of the biggest in south of England. And there's an acknowledged, this is not sort of conspiracy theory, it's been acknowledged by an admiral who was on TV saying there's 25 miles of underground tunnels there. Now, this was used for wartime bomb storage. Some of it was used for manufacturing, and it was also a citadel for the royal family to go in the time of war. Now, believe it or not, there were 5,000 people working underground at its heyday. And so it's a massive site underground. It's got its own telephone exchange. It's got canteens, cinema, stuff like that. Now, it doesn't look like that these days because a lot of it's been ripped out. So the only bits that are still kind of there, which are sort of period, is the telephone exchange, because it's I think it's got a listed status as a national treasure, because it's historical value. So they've had to keep some things. There's some paintings down there which were done to dress the place up as well, and those are listed. Anyway, sort of so that's one site. Then you've got Monkton Farley, which was, I believe, the largest underground ammunition store in Europe at one point. So that's just across the way. Then you've got a whole host of other sites which got converted for military use. There's one used by a wine storage company now, Octavian, which is just down the road. And there's a load of them dotted around. I mean, there's probably about 10 underground sites there, which were old sites. So this is all World War II developed and kept running, for a little bit up until the 80s, and a lot of them were sold off. Now you've also got the very secretive, more modern underground bunker called the Corsham Computer Centre.
Okay, now hang on a second before we go there. I mean, a few years ago, on one of these excursions with some of the Bristol anarchist group based around the Cube Cinema, we actually just walked across a field into a looked like a barn, down a little slope, and one of these places was just completely wide open. Anybody could walk down there.
I think you're probably talking about the back end, known as Section 19 of Monkton Farley, and I've done that myself. Yes, there was a barn, slope shaft. You went down underground, and just it all opened up. You had the corridors, which had conveyor belts. Do you remember conveyor belts there?
No, I don't. But I do remember it was very big. They brought some sort of little sound system with them and some lights and some booze, and we spent a sort of couple of hours having a bit of a mini rave down there. And but it was enormous. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Monkton Farley, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So you also asked about Copenhagen, which is right next to the A4. So you're driving along. You'd probably miss it these days because they've taken all the buildings away. But there is still remnants of the facility there because they still have the slope shafts, and they kept two of them. And we don't know why they bothered to keep them. It's a bit of a curiosity, really.
So
why would they?
What is a slope shaft?
A slope shaft is a sloping grade down into the ground. They would have had on the left-hand side a set of steps that you could walk down, and on the right-hand side a set of rails that you could end up sending heavy goods up and down. You know, you could pull things in and out of the ground, but they didn't really need to use those slope shafts in that area because they had lifts as well. They had goods lifts. The goods lifts have all gone, so those have disappeared, but they left the slope shafts. So we don't know quite why, but it was always a bit of a curiosity, that one, Copenhagen, because it was supposed to be used for storage, and there didn't seem to be a lot of storage stuff ever going on there when I've ever driven past. It always looked...
The other thing notable about Copenhagen is it always said joint services. Now, this is Army, Navy and Air Force, which is usually associated with the very top of the MOD.
They actually had a strange silver windowed building there, so they seemed to be quite worried about security because they didn't want anyone looking in. And it's funny that since that place has been levelled and turned into a new housing estate, that building has obviously gone. So where did those people go? Well, suddenly when that building went and it got turned into a housing estate, there was a new development across the road in Rudloe Site 2. And the MOD spent about £650 million on building up a new defence digital operations centre, which is an equivalent to GCHQ because it's used for cyber warfare stuff. And they didn't just build the buildings to house the people. Across the road from Rudloe Manor, they actually built 2 or 3 large data centres, which are colossal. I mean, these things are huge, and I've actually flown over it with my drone and filmed the whole area. So I mean, if anybody was interested in looking at these areas, just type in GOSCC, which is the Global Operations Security Command Control, I think it is. And yeah, these data centers are quite interesting because the Ministry of Defence try to distance themselves from ownership of them. You know, they've got front companies basically running these. And the funny thing is that when you look up the name of the front company that runs it, one of the directors is the I can't remember, Elizabeth Manningham Buller. I can't remember, head of MI5 anyway. I don't know what you call her. Like,
she used to have the nickname Bullying Manor. Yeah.
Yes. So, you know, when you've got the head of MI5 is a director of a secure data center that's right next to an equivalent GCHQ site that they've just built, you kind of think, well,
they're privatizing it all, Matt. But I mean, I remember reading up a bit of history about this back in the 1950s and 60s, around the times of the Aldermaston marches. There was a lot of hoo-ha in that whole area because the locals were saying, hang on, we now know, because of some sort of leak, that we're one of the main targets all around here for Soviet nuclear weapons. They're going to blast this place to kingdom come.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Corsham has always had a very heavy involvement to do with communications. Hence, underground, they had this huge operator room. And I mean, it was like corridors of women sitting there, you know, switching calls and doing all that sort of stuff. But then they also had the headquarters of radar this radar sections, which were known as rotor bunkers. And these were underground bunkers, which had guys sitting behind screens looking at screens for any incursions into UK airspace, and they would report all to each other through communications, but the communications were all controlled from Corsham. So it always has centralized itself as a hub, where all the communications came into Corsham. Now go on to current day, and it still holds that role, because there is a place there which is in an underground bunker. It's a different quarry. It's underground, but it's very close to Rudloe Manor Site 2, and it's called the CDCN, which is the Command of the Defence Communications Network. So this is the place that controls all our satellites, which we've got in space, spy satellites, and our communication satellites, which are known as Skynet, which is kind of a funny thing if you're into your AI and the Terminator. We've got Skynet satellites, and they even have their bunker is on Skynet Drive. So that's an interesting
well, have they got
place.
actual radomes on the surface there as well?
No, they it's all satellite uplink, so they've just got a load of satellite dishes there, but they're small ones. They're not very big. However, across in a place called Colerne, they've got the big dishes, so you can actually see the very big satellite dishes. And we're not talking something you could fit in your garden. You're talking about something that's about, I don't know, 100 foot, 300 foot across. These things are colossal. You can't miss them.
Yeah, they talk about golf balls quite a lot, don't they? And they use those up at Menwith Hill and Morwenstow, places like that. But the idea being, and a lot of people don't realise that you have to have a golf ball so that nobody can see which direction the dish is pointing.
That's true. If you're trying to spy on other people's satellites, you may have to track them. However, if you're just permanently communicating with your own satellites, then you can just be pointing the dishes in one direction only. So yeah. But if you're a spy, you can tell the spy places because they've got the golf balls. Basically, they're the spies because they don't want you seeing which way they're pointing. So yes, and there's lots of those around. I mean, GCHQ have got many places peppered around the country, and the USAF as well is somewhere near Oxford. I can't remember the name of it.
I think isn't Colerne also an airbase?
Colerne is an airbase. It's got an airstrip there, and I always commented when I was doing my research into Rudloe Manor. I said, well, it's for a it was supposedly disused airfield. It had the best maintained runway I'd ever seen, because I was a pilot as well. I mean, I've got a pilot's license, but I mean, the quality of that airstrip, it was top notch. They spent the most money on it, and it's like, well, what are they keeping it for? Well, when you've got an underground bunker where the royal family might go, it's the headquarters of communications. Well, maybe in an emergency, you need to get some aircraft in quickly. Well, that's just down the road.
Well, they talked about it as the regional seat of government. I wonder, are you aware of other regional seats of government, say for the north of England, Scotland, Wales, that sort of thing? Because this seems to be the main one.
Yeah, well, I've been to many of the regional seats of government. There are lots of them around there. There's one in Chilmark, which got famously put into the media because there was a cannabis grow room got put in it after it was disused. It got sold off, and Wiltshire Police had their largest cannabis bust down there. So these things are peppered all over the place. There's one in Glasgow, which is now being opened for tourists to go and visit. Kelvedon Hatch was another very significant site, and it's available for tourists to go and see it. And I would recommend it. It's highly recommended. Go and check it out.
So
if you want to see
that?
what would happen. Kelvedon Hatch is Essex way, I think. It's I'll tell you now.
I suppose this is another thing, isn't it? That you've got a lot of this Cold War stuff became redundant, is sold to private individuals who've now opened it up as kind of tourist attractions. But definitely not. That is not happening at Corsham. Let's be absolutely clear about that. As you're driving to Bristol on the A4, there it is on the left. And I mean, you were talking about millions of pounds being spent. Well, billions was spent there in the noughties, I think mostly in the noughties, and after 2010 in building this massive, loads of excavation, complete, a whole place sort of sealed off. Now that's all finished, and there's lots of innocent looking, almost like a kind of business park there.
Yes, well, the Corsham Computer Centre was paid for with black budget money. So a Margaret Thatcher secretly signed it off and didn't present, what this money was being spent on to Parliament. So it was all kind of, hush hush. That is situated just on the edge of the Rudloe Manor site, but it's actually off it's off in its own little area. And it struck us as being highly peculiar because we used to laugh about this. You've got all this security at Rudloe Manor. You've got guys with guns walking around, and if you go near the place, you'd probably be picked up, and sort of asked questions, which has happened to me a number of times, by the way. However, you've got this place just across the field where you can literally park your car, walk across, and there's it's a the fence to stop you getting close to it is knee high. It's just a chain basically, so you can step over that, and then when you get towards it, it has no signs on the outside saying what it is. Now, this is the way it used to be. It's changed recently, but there were no signs saying that it was MOD or what it did. And then you could walk up to it, pull the gate open, because it just had a little latch to the gate, pull the gate open and walk towards a bunker which was made out of grass, so it was literally like a bunker coming up out of the ground of grass. And you could walk down the steps. They had electronic doors and they would open, and then you'd have to buzz yourself in, and it was high security from that point in to get in. We never did get inside. Well, I did once by accident, because we turned up with a camera crew once, and we were wearing shirts, and they opened the doors for us without checking who we were, which was amazing. Got in, filmed it, and it never made it onto television. But yeah, very high security. Now, that's the Corsham Computer Centre, which has been touted as, it's just a document storage facility, they say. Really? No, it's actually a command and control centre for the nuclear submarine fleet.
Well, that's funny, because it's the same letters, isn't it? Initial letters, CC. Yeah, interesting. What was it actually like down there when you were accidentally allowed in? Can you describe it?
Yes, when you've got these glass doors which open out towards you, and you step in, and to the left, you go around the corner, you've got a glass bulletproof security thing where you've got two security guards sitting behind, and to the right of them are two protected booths which rotate. Now, these are the same that get used, I think they get used in like MI5 in London, when you can see in through the door. They've got these rotating security booths, and the idea is that it rotates and opens to let you in, then it closes to lock you in. Then you have to type in a code and identify yourself, maybe swipe a card or something like that. Then it will open and let you actually into the other side. And then you get in a lift. There's a lift there, and you go down about 120 feet underground, and that's where the bunker is.
Yeah, there is another way in, isn't there? But all you get is to the steel door, which is actually through the old stone mines, which a lot of speleologists, the potholers and people like that, can go down it, and they do.
They used to, but it's a lot of this stuff has been reclassified, and underground. A lot of it was unused, like the areas I'm telling you about, which were in Rudloe Manor, used as the central ammunitions depot. That for a long time they were playing this story of telling the public it was disused and there's nothing going on, nothing to see here, and it's going to get sold off and might get used for films and things. They were saying like that, and anyway, that all got reclassified about the time when they started building the data centers there and the GOSCC, the Global Operations Security Command Center. Then it got reclassified, but now they are putting out a kind of, I think it's a deflection smoke story to say that this is now being used for training for the military, for the army. And to that effect, to kind of convince people that that's what they're doing down there, they've even put out videos of guys with guns hiding around corners, playing war games underground. I've been told something different. I've been told that they do have infrastructure now being, made up underground there again. So that's
particularly interesting because I know certainly. Back in the late noughties, when I went down there, it took about an hour and a half. Eventually, we got to an area where there was a big red painted blast door, and you could hear some kind of generator behind it. But around about half of the old box stone mines were open. Only half of it was being used under there by the military.
That's right. Yes, I mean the military took the best part of the site, which still the military bit, not just the box mines, just the military bit is 25 miles of tunnels, which you can walk along, drive along. There are vehicles underground. They mostly use electric vehicles, but and this interesting box tunnel, which is the Isambard Kingdom Brunel tunnel for the rail, which goes from Bath to London. That tunnel, as you say, at the other end, it had a fork. So what they would do in the wartime, they would take a train through there, stop it, change the junctions, and actually take a train into the bunker and unload. So that's how big it is. It's actually got whole rail platforms underground and a spur underground.
Well, so, Brunel was pretty smart, wasn't he? Because he knew that actually there was loads of valuable Bath stone under there. So not only could he drive a tunnel through that area, he could also flog all the stone he was digging out.
Probably. I'm not sure about that, but yes. I mean, it's a fascinating area. And if you're ever on a train going from Bath to London and you go through a tunnel, just think right next to where I'm in the dark here is the bunker. There's a huge 25 miles of tunnels right next to you, and there's the secret Corsham Computer Centre bunker is in that section of underground tunnels and you've got the command of the Defence Communications Network. It's all there underground.
I did have a little chit chat once to someone who was a contractor who'd worked down there. And he was working with the British military, and they were complaining, saying that the Americans were actually starting to do far more down there, installing massive computer systems in Corsham. And the Brits actually were privately, off the record, chatting to him and saying, actually, we find the Americans incredibly difficult to deal with. They just seem to think this is their country and they can just order us around.
Well, yes. I mean, they've got their own MO of how they operate on their bases. And, you've only got to look at what happens to people who go too near to Menwith Hill and how they get treated. I mean, some of the peace protesters up there, I spoke to one girl who was literally run over by a police car, and done purposely. He knew what he was doing. He just ran her over, And so, yes, they don't like you getting near their secure sites. The place I was thinking of that had the golf balls, which is near Oxford, is Croughton. It's Croughton, Croughton or Crofton or something. Yeah. So that's another place.
No, that's Croughton. Well, that's again, it's called RAF Croughton, even though it's actually mostly Americans there. And this is
American.
Yeah, that's right. And this is where this awful woman, Anne Secoulis, drove out of there. Then on the wrong side of the road and mowed down, I think it was Harry Dunn on his motorbike, and then she skipped out of the country so she could avoid a trial.
God, yes. Yeah, diplomatic immunity, eh?
Well, it was, but she didn't actually have official diplomatic immunity because she was there supposedly as a civilian, even though it was only a cover. But this has caused an enormous amount of anguish to the locals. And this seems to be the attitude. The other interesting place around that area, I mean, it's a bit away from, it's up into Gloucestershire, is Fairford. And I noticed recently that there are a whole load of aircraft, US aircraft, these B-1Bs, which have been landing and taking off from there. I don't know if you know anything about that, Matt, but they are, we've had reports, funnily enough, not in the Gloucester papers, but in the Birmingham papers, saying that people are annoyed that they've been based there. So again, this is another enormous military target, with the locals complaining, saying, hang on, we don't really want to be a target for atom bombs. There was back about beginning of this month, actually, there was an article in the Birmingham Mail, uproar as US warplanes wake locals at 4 a.m. with thundering takeoffs as they set off on unknown mission. Well, this is it, exactly. Lancer bombers apparently thundering overhead at 4 a.m. And this whole use of the Americans, but I think we ought to really mention the work of investigative journalist Duncan Campbell, I mean, he did a lot of work in the 1980s, published War Plan UK, The Unsinkable Aircraft Carrier. He also did a series for the BBC, which was very controversial at the time, called Secret Society. And a lot of the implication of that, Matt, was that actually the US is running Britain. And in a military sense, if there was a larger war, the British forces would just be told what to do by the Yanks.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Duncan Campbell's work was groundbreaking. The guy's got very big cojones to be doing what he's doing. He has no fear, and hats off to him. Brilliant books, and I believe one of his TV series for the BBC was actually was taken off because it mentioned something about the Zircon spy satellites, which Britain didn't even say it had. Again, black budget money. We didn't have spy satellites, but apparently we did, and then it was denied. Oh no, we never had them. We were going to have them, but we never actually had them. Well, it's funny they say they never actually had them, because I was looking into a facility up in Malvern, which is a radio test site where they used to develop radio equipment. And whilst I was perusing around there, just left behind as junk, because it's a closed down thing, I found a box which was a server, and I looked inside it, and the names on the chips, which were printed on the chips, was Zircon. So these were the actual server units that would be used for communicating with the Zircon satellites. And I actually found the uplink servers, which had the controls for actually communicating with satellites, and I recognized them as such.
I think actually, Matt, if I was a publisher, I'd commission you to do a map book off the map. Because
yes.
Actually, the Malverns is another interesting one. There used to be a railway tunnel there through there, which was all boarded up. The legend is that the military had nothing to do with it. Well, apparently there was. If you talk to the locals, they say, "Oh yeah, we've seen military in and out of here over the years quite a lot."
Yes, Oswestry, BT have a large underground bunker, which is a nuclear protected site. I mean, in the centre of London, it's riddled with tunnels. Duncan Campbell did some brilliant stuff there, where he actually managed to get into a tunnel system in the centre of London, and they have bicycles down there. And people get on a bike and you cycle underground, because the distances are so large, and they have signposts saying this way to number 10, this way to Parliament, this way to the MOD, and it goes all the way across underneath London.
The ultimate conspiracy theory has got to be, is there a secret link between London and Corsham underground?
Well, that's always been the red herring story, which the locals kind of have gotten hold of. And the thing is, because they saw the tunnel going from the London line, London to Bath, that went into the hill, they knew the trains were going into the hill. So there was this, story which had been created through Chinese whispers that, well, that train line carries on underground and goes all the way to London. But I think there's never been any evidence of that. So, that was just a slightly, exaggerated.
This is a perfect, deliberate, what is it called? Disinformation, where they spread this stuff that hoping that people like you and I are going to just gobble it up and discredit ourselves.
Well, the one thing I was told repeatedly, around Corsham, was not only that it had the underground bunkers, because I started looking into that place not because of bunkers. I was looking for UFO stuff, and I found out about the bunkers and then became fascinated by all this underground Britain. But the one thing that has been brought up is that they had a nuclear generator underground. And it was from a submarine. It was a nuclear power system from a submarine, which was being used to power the underground systems in Corsham. Now, if that was true, the fact that there was some sort of nuclear materials being handled in and around the Corsham area would be, quite alarming. But there's so many other places out there which people didn't realize were handling nuclear materials, like I'm just trying to think, Dean Hill, for example, large munitions place that was handling nuclear materials. And, would they have stored nuclear materials in Corsham during, the war? After the war,
see why it would make sense.
50s to 80s.
Yeah, we can see why it would make sense to have a nuclear power source down there. after a while you're going to run out of diesel. You can't necessarily guarantee you're going to. And also, of course, you've got all the exhaust gases from diesel to deal with. So there's all sorts of reasons why, that's quite. And of course, all this stuff will come under military secrets. The MPs won't be able to scrutinise it. The only real scrutiny for this sort of thing, if you wanted to write to your MP or something, is through the Intelligence and Security Committee, which is all super hand-picked loyalists to the military, and they say virtually nothing. And in fact, they themselves, half the time, don't know the right questions to ask the military on that committee.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've tried using freedom of information to get answers, but you very rarely, if ever, get an answer with it, because the types of questions I'm asking, say, for instance, now about are they reusing in a classified sense the bunkers that formed the CAD at Corsham, are they back in action? And the response I got was something along the lines of, for defence reasons, we cannot answer your question. Now, that to me is a yes, because prior to this, they had told people there's nothing going on down there. It's not classified. So had you asked previously, you would have been told, no, there is nothing. No, it is not classified. So the fact they say we can't answer this question, it rings out, doesn't it? Yes, it is in use. Money's being poured into it. There's something secret going on underground in Corsham again. Well, a lot of secret things in that particular place, yes. So,
and I think the thing that entertains me most about it is it was just the other day going past RAF Rudloe Manor, where I'd been as a child, which was a sort of high security base, to see it transform magically into this extremely. I mean, all of the dry stone walls have been recently remade, at no expense spared. This kind of 4x4s going in and out of this apparently innocent farm. I mean, these 4x4s didn't have any dirt on them. I don't think they'd driven on a field at all. So there's definitely something going on. I think maybe we should wind up by mentioning Subterranea Britannica, because they do a lot of work on this kind of thing, don't they? It's
yes.
subbrit, subbrit.org.uk.
Yes, and another place to have a look for things is an author called Nick McCamley, who is the de facto expert on this sort of stuff, and he's written books called I think it's Secret Underground Cities is one you can have a look for. And if you want to find out about the reality of this stuff, if you think, oh, it sounds a bit too far-fetched, well, if you want to see photos and all the details, Nick McCamley's your man. So yes.
So I mean, what about with people like you and him? Do you ever find that the military are trying to get you shut down? I mean, they may classify you as a danger to official secrets and that sort of thing.
There was a letter which was we found at the Public Records Office, and it talked about me, and my name had gone to the Secretary of Defence, and they basically said, we've got this guy who's asking us all these questions. What should we do? And his response was, I think the words were, tell him nothing. Yes. So I'm kind of like a marked man in terms of, they know I'm asking all the relevant questions. They don't want to give me any answers. So I think, if there's a rule that's been put in place, tell him nothing, then, every question I've ever asked, I've been refused. Other people have got more information when they've written to the Ministry of Defence than I have. I always get refused every single time. So everything I've had to find out, through investigative means. But
that's right. Yeah. And also sometimes just by chatting to the locals.
It's a really good way to find stuff, is just speak to the locals. You'll get the conspiracy stuff and the exaggerations, but you'll get a good flavour of what's going on by just chatting to local people, and they're usually very happy to talk. So it's a good technique. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old-fashioned way, isn't it? Anyway, look, Matt, Thanks ever so much for all that. And I wonder if people want to follow your work, where's the best place to do it?
Well, you can have a look at my antics going into abandoned buildings and old military sites and things like that on my YouTube channel. It's called The Secret Vault, but it's all one word, so no spaces. So The Secret Vault. And if you look on The Secret Vault and do a search for Rudloe Manor, Corsham, you'll find videos of us flying a drone all over these places, and even going into some of the old disused bits. So plenty for you to to have a bit of fun looking at.
I mean, I would have thought actually the Ministry of Defence should be very, very pleased. They should be paying you, because what you're doing is, or maybe they are. But what you're doing is testing their, security, isn't it? It's actually a very useful job that us journalists are doing in probing and seeing, well, what actually are you really, what you're actually really doing there. You're clearly trying to pretend to the country and to the locals that you're not, but you are.
Well, there's a funny story, because I mean, I do have communications with, I have spoken to people who work at Corsham a few times over the years, never got anywhere with it, very dismissive. And I said, can I come in and have a look? Can I come underground and have a look? Because in the past, they've taken television crews in from BBC Channel 4. They refused me this point blank, nope, there's no way you're coming in. And it's like, okay, well, it's very kind. Thank you very much. It's part of this kind of like, do not cooperate with Mr. Williams type of thing, that I've had. But in speaking to one chap there, he said, oh, it's all been reclassified now, and you won't get back in there. And I said, well, we're pretty we're quite good, we might find a way in there. He said, no, you'll never get in there. Well, we didn't, but one urban explorer did actually go in through. He just basically jumped over a fence, got up to their lift shaft, and took the lift down underground and went round filming for hours underneath there. So I still haven't had the time to ring this chap up and say, oh, apparently you're highly secure, but we all know that this bloke got in, didn't he? So what does that say about your security? So anyway, people are testing. Well, anyway, them. Yeah,
it is. I mean, this is what journalists used to do all the time. Even, court cases, never mind freedom of information requests, to find out what was really going on with our money. Especially since we're now lined up with the Americans and the Israelis. This is another sort of sidebar here, is that you've got this so-called Five Eyes spy network. Actually, it's not. It's Six Eyes. Apparently, people only have one eye. Maybe it's in the middle of their forehead. But the Six Eyes includes the Israelis, and everything that's shared amongst the Five Eyes, which is Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Britain, and the United States, is also shared with the Israelis, much of it too. So anyway, look, fascinating insight, and we'll have to go hopping over a wire or two in the next few months, Matt, to see what we can find up there.
I would say that I'm not suggesting you do that, but good luck if you do. Yes.
All right, Matthew Williams, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Tony.